Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about how warfare, even if today, let alone the future, is likely to be fought. And we can look at the issue of civil being just as poignant and just as topical as any inter-nation or inter-region war. So let's just have a little look at that and see where it's going. For example, will cyber warfare decide the outcome of battles? You know, if all your infrastructure gets knocked out, your planes can't fly, your electricity can't be generated, nothing's working, everything's gone to shit. Is that and you can't rebuild it or counter cyber attack? Is that really going to be decide the outcome of really any sort of a confrontation? So if one nation can say, do what we want, otherwise we'll nuke all your assets, as in nothing's going to work and nothing's going to function, not a street light in the nation's going to function, and so on, then that's pretty much a victory, I would think. I don't know how much that really, how you could fight back against that, unless you could nuke each other perhaps at the same time. But if one is shielded, one nation or one group is shielded from the other and can attack with relative impunity, then that's pretty much the victory in the bag, you'd think. And I'm not sure wars are going to be wars per se of invasion. You know, if China sort of dominates America, they may say, look, we've got 35 million people in our prisons. We really don't want them here. They're kind of a bit of so we're going to send them over to you, and they're going to be your problem to feed and to house and to deal with. And by the way, you better show some respect to China while you're at it. Those sort of things could easily happen. And I think it's going to be more like that, where one group or nation can demand and get financial concessions that are very profitable to the aggressor nation or the aggressor group, and they think they've got the means to enforce it and get away with it and not be accountable for it and not suffer any consequences for it. So I think cyber warfare is obviously a key one there. Also, things like controlling the satellites. There's so much of our information movement and all sorts of things is controlled by satellites, that if one group or nation can neutralize the other guy's satellites, then that too would be a very serious, you'd be running blind. It's the equivalent of cutting all the telephone lines in the 1950s or something. You'd be absolutely paralyzed. And so I think that's one there. And also, of course, informational control. Now, a lot of these things can apply, particularly the informational control and the cyber attacks in what we now can see as a civil war. We're seeing it now that the globalist cabal has taken over all Western governments, and all Western governments are effectively at war with their own citizens. They're determined to implement the globalist project without the consent and agreement of the citizenry, the Western citizenry. I mean, look what's happening in Canada now. I mean, for goodness sakes, if that's not a dystopia, then I don't know what is. So this is going to be information control. Who controls the media, who controls what narratives are put out there, or these sort of things. This is how I think civil war can be fought. Also, of course, this idea of cyber warfare. Any voice internal, that disagrees. You look at anyone that disagrees with the globalist narrative now is shut down. They're doxxed. They're publicly accused of being Nazis. Their bank accounts can be shut down. They can be publicly, humiliated and shamed by the telling of the most outrageous lies and untruths and grotesque untruths. And the social cohesion and trust in society is being eroded by the use of various fifth column, what you'd call fifth column, that are supported by by the globalists, and that again neutralises the cohesion and trust amongst other groups in society, which of course is what the globalists want. So I think civil war isn't two armies lining up. I suppose it theoretically could happen, but I don't think boots on the ground are needed anymore to really do that. And the effectiveness of boots on the ground, if you look in the wars the Americans have had in and others that have joined them have had in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, 20 years, and they still can't beat a bunch of goat herders, wearing skirts. So yeah, I mean, it's illiterate goat herders. It's absurd, but so boots on the ground aren't primarily the issue, and the Americans were totally, absolutely unable to win over the Afghanis to the Western way of life, and hardly surprising. I mean, they spend more time pushing gender studies and lesbian counselling services than they did helping them build wells or grow crops or more efficient management of herding their goats and that sort of thing. They were just full on trying to push Western social disruption rather than anything else. And of course, it wasn't embraced. Now, the globalists obviously are pushing and have much more control in the West over the local populace, so they can much more tightly control the narrative and force it on us, and of course, cause maximum disruption through mass black and brown peasant migration and so on. But that's how civil war, I think, is I believe is going to be fought. I think we're already in the middle of that civil war now. Just because it hasn't involved boots on the ground, we've kind of thought, well, it's not really a war yet. We're thinking maybe of it in older terms. Again, not that it couldn't break out into something like that, but I don't see that's where it's heading. I think it's just a case of who can control the information, who can control the narrative, and who can be more effective at disrupting the other side and their operations, and declare themselves the winner. The trouble with the West is the globalists are so busy fighting their own citizens in order to implement the globalist project that while they're doing that, China is growing stronger by the day, by the minute. And by the time the globalists declare victory over their own people who never wanted what they're trying to force on them anyway, by that stage, China will be far too difficult to control. And the Chinese will in turn impose terms on these globalists that think they're so fucking smart at the moment. So I think civil war is what we're in right now. And one of the definitions, of course, of civil war is one where one group of the society effectively turns against the other. And I mean, this is what happened in the American Civil War. 40% of the population turned against the other 60%, and over issues that's probably a little esoteric in some ways. How centralised would the federal government be, and how independent would the states be? There's a lot of talk about it's all about slavery. That's crap. The issue was to what were the states' rights, and to what extent could the federal government encroach on those rights? And you look at it now and you say, well, gee, that was a big argument over what was really something that people should have sat down and talked about. But there were attempts to discuss it. I don't know how genuine they were on either side. Some people maybe weren't that genuine, but some were, and it broke out into warfare. And another aspect of civil war, and many wars, but civil war in particular, is that each side isn't prepared to back down, but they don't think it's going to go to open conflict. If you look at the American War of Independence, nobody really foresaw an open conflict there. And yet it happened. It kind of happened at a step at a time, almost reluctantly. Even when the British sent an army over to as they saw it, to stop the colonists' rebellion, the general in charge of it was also the chief negotiator to negotiate a peace. I mean, how's that for a difficult job description? So the Civil War, and that's really what the American War of Independence was. It was a civil war between the British colonists and the British home country. So what's the idea of civil war, or how it occurs, is again where this one group turns against the other of the same in group. And this is really what's happened in the West now. The globalists have taken over the elite and the information institutions like the media and the banks, and they control that, and they're trying to force on a very unwilling populace the globalist project, and that in effect is a civil war. And it'll be interesting to see sort of how it pans out over the years. If we look at what's happening in Canada now, we can see the most terrible dystopia, and if that's the future, then we should all be very worried. But I think civil war is here now. I think it's being fought in the narratives, in the cyberspace, in the censorships, in the the globalist politicians just telling endless lies, falling in line with the globalist narrative, and trying to deceive the populace. It's fought in the streets in the sense of using surrogate groups like the various NGOs or Black Lives Matter, Antifa, to disrupt white society and cause confusion and distrust and to demoralize and these sorts of things. I think that's what's happening. And those things have happened in the past. For example, before World War II kicked off, there was a lot of German propaganda in the French newspapers. Now, this wasn't hard because France was already very demoralized. They'd had that Jewish socialist government there for a while of Leon Blum, and that hadn't gone down so well, and that had caused a lot of demoralization. So when the war actually came along, there really wasn't many French people who thought the French Republic was worth fighting for, and you could see that in how quickly the French army collapsed. Not that the Wehrmacht wasn't a superbly trained and organised and led army. They were the gold standard of the day and still are considered as that. But even so, they went down like they went down in 6 weeks or something like that. It was all over, and that's incredible for an army of that size to fall over so quickly. I mean, to give you an idea of the scale of it, there were something like close on 7 million combatants on, like you include both sides. The war was over so quickly that the casualties, of all combatants combined were like less than 100,000, and including injury and that sort of thing. Now you contrast that with the millions that died in World War One and on that Western Front through France and Belgium, and the millions that say would die on the Eastern Front in World War Two. The casualties were incredibly light for that scale of conflict, but it just shows how quickly or how unwilling the French were to die for their cause, and they were particularly demoralised, politically, socially, and this fed into the so demoralising your enemy, as in the globalists perceive, all straight white males as being their enemy. This idea of demoralising the enemy is a very key part of making them just they think, it's just not worth fighting back. It's just not worth arguing. It's not worth asking the question. And that's definitely what the globalists are trying to do in the West, particularly to straight white males or anyone else that wants to say anything. Straight white Christian males in particular. And if you look at the appointments, even across the board, you look at the Biden government's appointments to key positions, whether it be in telecommunications, the law courts, and just about anything else. They're putting in, Christian hating, straight white male hating activists in these key positions. And you look at that and you start saying to yourself, and you see it in maybe not quite to the same extent in Australia, but you see it in Britain and places like that. And you look at it and say, well, why am I going to put any energy into opposing these people? They're destroying everything that I hold dear, every institution, every belief in the law, the rule of law, due legal process, the political process. They're destroying it all. And that in itself has a demoralizing effect, which is, again, part of what we can call a modern civil war tactic. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.